When quantum consciousness awakens, spiritual guides don't arrive with an explosion. There are no dramatic signs piercing the sky, no bursts of light. Instead, this contact is almost imperceptibly silent, yet so profound that ignoring it is irreversible. The veil between your consciousness and reality isn't instantly torn. It first loosens. And this loosening changes not the world, but the way you perceive it. Perhaps you'll feel this one morning in a completely ordinary moment. A corner, a table, a window you've looked at thousands of times before. The same, but not the same. The light doesn't look different. You, the one perceiving the light, have changed. The brain's logic centers can't explain this difference because this change occurs not in thought, but in deeper layers of perception. In neuroscience, this is called a pre-conscious perception shift, the state of being aware of information before it's transformed into words, thoughts, or interpretations. Your hands might automatically perform a task, and suddenly a feeling of alienation might arise. It's as if you're a guest in your own body, not the other way around. This isn't a pathological condition. Rather, it's a natural state of consciousness that arises when the brain's default mode network temporarily falls silent. In other words, the mind stops constantly producing the self-narrative. Quantum consciousness kicks in precisely in this void. These moments are brief. Because the rational mind cannot tolerate uncertainty. It wants to make sense of it. It wants to define it. But the moment this experience is defined, it collapses. Just as in quantum mechanics, the observation process stabilizes. Therefore, this initial contact is felt before it is captured by thought. However, in the deeper architecture of consciousness, these moments are not random. They are threshold signals. When quantum consciousness reaches a certain maturity, your perceptual system begins to read not only physical stimuli, but also subtle arrangements of the field. In physics, this is called phase coherence. That is, the system synchronizes with a broader field of information. This is where spiritual guides come in, but not with sounds or images as you might expect. Their language is not symbolic, it is sensory. An unexplained expansion in your chest, a slight warmth running down your spine, that strange yet peaceful space between two thoughts. These are indicators that the usual hierarchy between the brain's limbic system and cortex has been temporarily suspended. Nothing changes in the outside world, but you're no longer on the same frequency. The quantum field reacts instantly to this frequency shift. It doesn't impose anything on you. It simply adds a slight dissonance to what is familiar. And then it withdraws. Whether you notice it or not is up to you. This moment of awareness is crucial because the momentum of your previous identity breaks here. Mental programs, habits, social roles that have been running on autopilot for years. They all hang suspended in the air for a moment. This state of suspension is where the real transformation begins. The physical body perceives it before thought. Because the body is the most sensitive system for processing quantum information. Scientifically, we know that cells respond to electromagnetic and quantum signals much faster than chemical signals. Therefore, your body knows something has changed before your mind does. Therefore, the first signs are sensations, not thoughts. This initial shift is not a reaction, it is an invitation. The intervention of spiritual guides is not in the form of direction. It is in the form of resonance. They do not force you. They simply invite you to a deeper level of perception. The moment you become aware of this invitation, you cannot completely return to your old state of consciousness. The power of this moment is not in its intensity, but in its subtlety. It does not shake you, but it leaves an unshakable certainty. An almost invisible crack forms on the surface of reality, and beyond this crack, you sense the presence of another order. From this point on, logic is still present, but it is not the guide. This guide arises from the combination of awareness and intuition. A deeper layer of your being knows that this is not a random moment. This is the accumulation of small inconsistencies that have built up over the years. The question, am I really living here? These questions are a natural consequence of identities that feel too restrictive to you. When quantum consciousness opens, reality presents you with a new layer. This layer is not in the future. It is certainly not in a distant timeline either. It exists now, in the moment you are in. Not loudly, but subtly. Not forcefully, but with undeniable clarity. This is the beginning of the journey. This is the opening sequence of the quantum field. Chapter 2. Your body understands. Before your mind, you understand while you react. As the field continues to draw you toward a deeper layer, the interesting thing is that this orientation begins long before your conscious mind becomes aware of it. Neuroscience research shows that the decision-making process takes shape in the brain an average of 300 to 700 milliseconds before conscious awareness. So, when you say, "I just realized this," your body and nervous system are already aligned in that direction. Therefore, this inner pull is felt with bodily certainty, not through thought. The expansion in the chest, the warmth radiating upwards in the spine, the sudden reduction of mental noise. These are not coincidences. When the autonomic nervous system, especially the parasympathetic network, is activated, the organism exits danger mode and its perceptual sensitivity increases. The moments when contact with the field deepens are precisely these moments of biological openness. Quantum biology studies reveal that living systems process information not only through chemical reactions, but also through vibrational harmony. These structures, ranging from cell membranes to microtubules, are known for their extreme sensitivity to environmental signals. When your conscious mind calms down, these biological receptors essentially switch to fine-tuning mode. You don't see the field signals, but you recognize them with a sense of absolute accuracy. This is where the mechanism that most ancient teachings called intuition and modern science defines as implicit cognition comes into play. While the brain processes millions of pieces of information per second at the subconscious level, the conscious mind can only access a tiny fraction of them. The sense of direction emerges here. You don't yet know why, but you don't doubt your direction. At this stage, synchronicities increase. This phenomenon, described by psychologist Carl Jung, is now understood more clearly through complex systems theory. When a system becomes sufficiently sensitive, meaningful alignments emerge between external and internal events. The people you encounter, the sentences you hear, the information that arrives at the right time. These are not chaotic, but signs of a higher order. Surprisingly, as this process progresses, the need for mental control diminishes. As the prefrontal regions of the brain, constantly preoccupied with planning, regress, the networks associated with holistic perception strengthen. You no longer feel the need to defend, explain, or justify everything. Competition gives way to openness, resistance to flow, This is not passivity. It is a state of awareness that operates with higher efficiency. Scientists observe a significant decrease in stress hormones and an increase in heart rate variability in individuals in this state. This is the body's "I'm on the right track" signal. Alignment with the field is confirmed not only mentally, but also physiologically. As this attraction continues, everything that no longer belongs to you begins to silently dissolve. Some relationships become meaningless. Some habits disappear spontaneously. You don't force it. Because the system no longer tolerates frequency mismatch. As in physics, discordant structures in consciousness cause energy loss and are eliminated by the system. The most critical point is this. This process creates an irreversible awareness. Once you realize this alignment, you cannot completely return to the old layer of perception. Even if you try, your inner intelligence will not allow it. Because now you have made contact with the field, recognized the guidance, and remembered your direction. If a quiet but clear sense of recognition awakens within you as you read these words, it is no coincidence. It is the echo in words of a path your consciousness has already been treading. And this journey, as always, continues inward, not outward. Chapter 3: Witnessing Your Life. The moment consciousness switches roles. You reach a point in your life where the first thing that shakes you is not your thoughts, but your body. Because the deepest shifts in consciousness manifest not through mental explanations, but through bodily awareness. This moment usually catches you off guard. It doesn't come with a major event, trauma, or collapse. Rather, it is hidden within an extremely ordinary moment. The world around you is the same. The circumstances haven't changed. The people are the same people. But an imperceptibly small internal shift occurs, and this shift irrevocably transforms everything. This is the moment you realize you are no longer a character in the story. You don't leave the story. You don't leave the scene. Only your role changes. From being a reacting figure at the center of the drama, you become a witness who can see the entire scene. This transition corresponds to what is described in consciousness research as meta-awareness. That is, a layer of consciousness is activated that thinks your thoughts, feels your emotions, but does not identify with them. Neuroscience reveals something crucial at this point. The brain's limbic system, responsible for emotional responses, is still functioning. The body is still producing micro-responses. There may be slight increases in heart rate, mild muscle tension. However, when the regulatory function of the prefrontal cortex kicks in, these responses no longer overwhelm consciousness. Therefore, words that once shook you no longer have the same intensity. The same scenes are repeating themselves, but you are not the same person. This awareness often arises in the most mundane moments. While talking to someone, you suddenly find yourself emotionally withdrawn. You continue listening. You feel you understand, but another layer is active inside. This layer sees what is happening not as a personal story, but as a process. Or, while going through a situation that pushes you to uncontrollable reactions, this time you feel as if you are watching the same scene from the outside. Emotions are there, but they don't carry you away. Reactions are there, but they don't define you. At this point, a crucial distinction emerges. The distance between thoughts and the person carrying them widens. Emotions and the consciousness that perceives them become separated. In modern studies of consciousness, this is described as the dissolution of ego identification. You no longer perceive every thought that arises in your mind as self. You no longer accept every emotion that arises as absolute truth. Thoughts are mental contents. Emotions are energy moving in the body. And you remain the field that perceives all of this. This state of witnessing also silently eliminates the need to control life, because the need for control stems from the unknown. When you are a witness, uncertainty ceases to be a threat. You begin to see what is happening in a broader context. You realize how people react not to you, but to their own fears. You see the defenses behind the toughness, the vulnerability beneath the attacks. You realize that life progresses not with dramatic explosions, but with subtle adjustments. This perspective shows that what you perceive as chaos is actually a complex but coherent order. According to complex systems theory, when viewed from a sufficiently broad perspective, patterns that appear as disorder reveal a meaningful structure. When you stand in the position of a witness, you realize that life doesn't drag you along. You can stay afloat and move forward without being swept away by the current. That's why this moment is a turning point. You don't need to change the circumstances. You don't need to fix the people, the past, or the environment. Only your perspective changes. And when your perspective changes, the meaning of everything changes too. Obstacles that once seemed like walls now become natural curves in the road. Problems don't define you, they educate you. From this point, an extraordinary but silent awareness emerges. You realize that no one is working against you. Life has no plan against you. Circumstances are not enemies. Everything is a reflection of the frequency of consciousness you possess. And the moment you realize this, the old layers of consciousness lose their influence over you. Because what is seen is no longer controllable. At that moment, you realize you've stepped outside the story and into the position of the one writing it. You cease to be a passive character. You become the awareness that determines how life will be experienced. You are no longer afraid of what will happen because you see how reality reacts. This is the threshold at which space can carry you further. And right here, the old story begins to silently unravel. The new story has not yet been written. But now you know. This time, it will be written with awareness, not automatic reactions. Chapter 4: Dissolving the Old Self. The silent restructuring of consciousness. This dissolution doesn't invite you to disappear, but to shed the protective but dysfunctional shells that have enveloped you for years. While remaining a witness, you begin to realize that much of your identity was shaped not by free will, but by repeated stress responses, learned defense mechanisms, and automatic strategies developed to adapt to the environment. In modern psychology, this is described as the conditioned self. Fear, avoidance, anticipation, defense, and adaptation. The brain, especially in early childhood, repeatedly triggers these responses to ensure survival when it perceives a threat. Neuroscientifically, these repetitions reinforce neural networks and over time transform into patterns that you perceive as your personality. But these patterns exist not because they represent you, but because they once protected you. What you realize when the dissolution begins is this: many of the emotions, reflexes, and even thoughts you carry are not your own. They are the imprints left on your nervous system by stories you had to endure in the past to survive. When this awareness emerges, the old self doesn't disappear instantly, but it loses its influence. It ceases to be the central control over you. At this stage, many people feel suspended between the two states. You are no longer the old person, but the new state hasn't fully crystallized yet. In psychology, this period is described as post-dissolution restructuring, and it is actually a completely healthy transitional phase. It's not a mistake, but a natural stage of conscious evolution. During this process, you may notice that things that once seemed very important begin to fade. This isn't because they've become worthless, but because they no longer resonate with your inner reality. Some conversations and social interactions you used to automatically participate in now drain your energy. Some beliefs that once supported you now feel restrictive and stifling. Even some relationships begin to consume you instead of nourishing you. At this point, inner honesty kicks in. As the prefrontal cortex regions of the brain become more active, a clearer, unfiltered perception of yourself develops. You no longer want to cling to unimportant patterns simply because they feel safe. Because a deeper part of your inner consciousness demands openness, not conformity. Dissolution is not a loss. It is a reorganization of the nervous system and consciousness. The only thing lost are the structures that no longer fit your current level of awareness. You don't need to force yourself to let go. As is known neuroscientifically, when a new and more holistic perception emerges, the old circuits naturally weaken and shut down. At this stage, the old self may try to return with familiar questions. Who will I become if I change? What will be left if I let go? Will I lose everything I've built so far? These questions arise not to stop you, but to protect you. The old self wants to maintain its existence because it believes it's its job to keep you alive. However, this role is completed the moment you step into a broader layer of awareness. You don't need to fight it. You just need to stop believing that this is you. When you remain in the position of a witness, you understand why dissolution happens so quietly. The true self doesn't emerge with noise. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't need to defend itself. At this point, the false roles begin to fall one by one. The need to be tough to appear strong. The need to conform to be loved. The need to be constantly busy to feel valued. It all dissolves. Because you clearly see that these roles no longer represent you. They are merely costumes worn for a while. One of the most striking moments of this dissolution is when parts of yourself that you thought you had left behind begin to return. This return comes not as a memory, but as an emotion. Like remembering a time when you were freer, deeper, more authentic. This emotion is devoid of regret. It carries a sense of homecoming. As your chronic defense mechanisms diminish, your body lightens. Your mind clears because it no longer tries to control everything. Body-mind tension decreases. This stems not from a change in your life, but from no longer carrying unnecessary burdens. When the heavy armor of the old self falls, inner space expands. Breathing becomes deeper and more natural. Reactions lessen, perception increases. You defend less, feel more. You begin to perceive the world not through a filter of fear, but through direct experience. The dissolution of the old identity takes nothing valuable from you. On the contrary, it removes limitations that are not yours. When these layers fall, your true self emerges. This is not a new version. This is the version that was never lost. And with this clarity, everything in your life begins to align with the real one, not the false identity. This is a sign of stepping out of the old zone and entering a layer of consciousness where the real one no longer needs to be hidden. Dissolution is not an end. It is where awareness truly begins. Chapter 5: Understanding Quantum Principles in Daily Life. How does consciousness read reality? Your reality is not a fixed structure imposed on you from the outside, as you might think. Rather, it is a dynamic process that is reinterpreted and restructured every day, every moment, through your perception, attention, and inner state. In this respect, quantum principles are not abstract, inaccessible theories valid only in laboratory settings, as most people think. They offer a language that explains how matter and information behave at the most fundamental level. And this language is constantly operating in the background of our daily experience. Until now, you have learned to perceive reality only as a fixed, singular, and linear structure. However, when perception changes, that is, when the old self begins to dissolve, the way the mind reads the world also changes. In psychology, this is described as the loosening of top-down perception. That is, when past beliefs, automatic judgments, and conditioning disappear, the brain begins to process data more directly and with less filtering. Quantum mechanics is not a supernatural or mystical narrative. It is one of the most strongly validated areas of modern physics. But the most important thing it teaches us is this: reality is not limited to a single definite outcome. Systems exist as probabilities before they are measured. This is not a claim of control to be directly transferred to human experience. Rather, it is a powerful analogy at the level of perception and attention. First principle: the simultaneous existence of probabilities. Classical thinking leads us to believe that life offers only one path, one outcome, and one future. But at the quantum level, systems contain multiple possibilities simultaneously until a measurement occurs. In everyday life, this coincides with the existence of states in a potential state that you haven't yet decided on, directed, or clarified. A similar situation is observed in brain science. Before a decision is made, multiple possible scenarios are simultaneously evaluated in the brain. When you direct your attention to a particular option, that neural network strengthens while others weaken. In other words, you are not creating the future out of nothing. You are making one of the existing potentials actually accessible. Second principle: attention and emotion shape. Experience. In quantum physics, this principle, called wave function collapse, refers to a system's transition from uncertainty to a certain state. In everyday life, this directly corresponds to the points where attention merges with emotional charge. Neuroscience shows that thoughts fueled by emotion leave stronger imprints in the brain. A scenario focused on anxiety activates threat networks and causes the individual to perceive the world as more dangerous. Similarly, focusing on a state of trust, curiosity, or calmness leads to different behaviors and experiences. The point here is not controlling the universe with thought, but which internal state makes which experiences accessible. Third principle: information transmission. Within connection and field quantum entanglement shows that particles, once they interact, can remain connected regardless of the distance between them. This principle is not a mystical force directly applicable to human relationships. However, it has counterparts in biology and psychology. The human brain continues to carry information about people and experiences with which it has previously established meaningful connections at a subconscious level. Therefore, intuition, sudden awareness, or a feeling of premonition arises. This is not supernatural. It is the result of the brain rapidly processing data from past connections at a preconscious level. Fourth principle: systems respond to situations, not words. The field, whether you call it the environment, the social system, or biological feedback, responds more to situations than to words. A person may say they want peace, but if they are carrying chronic stress in their body, their nervous system will send a threat signal to the environment. People react to this. Relationships are shaped accordingly. Therefore, people who exert less effort but are internally consistent achieve more balanced results than those who exert excessive effort but are internally fragmented, because systems perceive consistency. Fifth principle: as awareness increases, perceived reality changes. The external world may remain the same, but when your perception changes, the meaning you read also changes. As awareness expands, the brain sees more data and produces fewer automatic responses. Therefore, what one person sees as an obstacle, another may see as an opportunity. The world doesn't adapt to you. You adjust your perception of the world. And when that adjustment changes, your experience inevitably differs. The sixth principle: the continuous reconstruction of the self-humans are not static beings. The nervous system is reshaped with every experience. Every calm moment, every honest choice, every retreat from defense, all create a new version of the brain and identity. What we call quantum transformation is not a sudden explosion. It is the accumulation of small but consistent choices. You don't need to believe in these principles to understand them. Observing them is enough. When you notice where you focus your attention, what emotions you experience, and what reactions you repeat, you begin to see how reality is shaped. First you feel, because the body understands before consciousness. Then the mind makes sense of it. When the internal order changes, the external experience adapts accordingly. This is not a belief system. It is how human consciousness and perception work. The purpose of this section is to provide a framework for how consciousness operates at the quantum level. As you delve deeper, you will begin to see more clearly how these principles find concrete expression in your life. Because true transformation begins not with knowledge, but with awareness. Chapter 6: Timeline Slope: Repositioning Consciousness. When reality branches out. When a slope forms in the timeline, you don't notice it instantly as most people expect. This kind of shift manifests not as explosive events or dramatic breaks in the external world, but as a very subtle realignment at the center of perception. When the way the brain and consciousness process reality changes, this shift first affects your internal points of reference, and only after taking a few steps in the new direction do you begin to realize that the old framework of reality is no longer quite appropriate. In neuroscience, this is described as updating the cognitive map. When the brain operates within the same patterns of behavior and networks of meaning for a long time, it produces a certain normal perception of reality. But as awareness increases, these networks loosen, and the person feels as if they are experiencing something different, even though they are in the same environmental conditions. Therefore, the timeline slope is more about readjusting the system that reads these events than a change in the events themselves. The first noticeable sign of this process is not fatigue or reluctance, but rather a feeling of dissonance. Therefore, conversations that once felt natural now seem superficial and boring. Goals that once motivated no longer generate inner momentum, and even the presence of some people creates an inexplicable sense of distance. In psychology, this is called value-behavior mismatch. The person has changed, but the environment has not yet adapted to this change. The second obvious sign is that the person feels as if they're living on two different layers of reality simultaneously. Daily routines continue, social roles persist, but immediately beneath this, a quieter, clearer, and more consistent inner flow is felt. This is not a dream of a future self. Rather, it is the result of the brain and nervous system beginning to revert to a previously repressed but already existing form of regulation. The system carries the old and the new together for a short time while creating a new normal. The third sign that comes into play at this point is small but meaningful choices, not grand decisions, rather micro preferences that seem insignificant from the outside shift direction. Refusing an invitation because it doesn't come from the heart, calmly saying no to something habitually accepted as yes, or intuitively choosing another path without clear logical reasoning. According to decision theory, these kinds of small choices significantly alter the paths of probability over time as the system begins to operate according to internal consistency rather than old habits. The fourth sign is the increasing speed of simultaneities. What's happening here isn't a mystical creation. It's an increase in the sensitivity of the attention and perception system. The brain now begins to notice signals it previously filtered out. Therefore, the time between a thought and an event seems to shorten. In fact, what's accelerating isn't the events themselves, but the timing sensitivity of perception. In complex systems theory, this is explained as the acceleration of feedback loops as the system approaches a new equilibrium point. The fifth sign is a subtle but perceptible sense of distance between you and the world. This isn't a disconnect, it's a difference in regulation. Events that previously shook you emotionally no longer affect you with the same intensity. The nervous system doesn't switch to threat mode as quickly as before. This isn't a weakening of the stress response. It's a shift to a higher level of awareness. You still feel what's happening, but you're no longer fully immersed in it. The sixth sign is a feeling of knowing that has no logical explanation, but is remarkably clear. This is called the activation of intuition. Intuition isn't a random feeling. It's the result of rapid, pre-conscious assessments the brain makes from past experiences and contextual data. As the person approaches the new timeline, they begin to read probability distributions more accurately. Therefore, they know that some doors will close and some will open, but they can't yet rationally explain it. The seventh sign is that letting go becomes surprisingly easy. Separations that once required great internal struggles are now experienced naturally and lightly. This isn't a loss of value. It's the spontaneous resolution of incompatibility. From a psychological perspective, since the person no longer bases their identity on old structures, separating from them doesn't create a sense of threat. The eighth and final sign is that the forward movement becomes more fluid. Life isn't perfect. Effort doesn't disappear entirely, but you no longer have to constantly swim against an invisible countercurrent. Energy loss decreases, decision-making speeds up, and the distance between action and internal motivation shortens. This isn't an increase in luck, it's a decrease in resistance. The slope of the timeline isn't an external miracle, it's the natural result of an individual aligning with their own internal order. When a person stops forcing themselves into an old identity, the old branch of reality can no longer hold them. The new timeline isn't created. It's a transition from already existing possibilities to the most harmonious one. There's nothing mysterious here. Consciousness simply returns to its center. And at this point, the next steps emerge not through coercion, but through a natural openness. This slight slope in the timeline doesn't disrupt life. On the contrary, it brings you back to the trajectory you belong to from the very beginning. Chapter 7. Embodied Frequency, a state of being and balancing consciousness. When entering the stage of embodied frequency, everything previously felt in fragments on the inner journey begins to acquire a coherent and sustainable structure for the first time. At this point, there is no longer a need to constantly analyze signs of disharmony, to wait for reassuring signals from the environment, and to consciously try to produce the right state. Because the entire system, mind, body, and perception, is aligned with the same point of reference. At this stage, the individual is no longer someone searching for the frequency. They have become the frequency itself. Psychologically, this means that motivation begins to stem from internal regularity rather than external triggers. Stability is no longer a discipline maintained by willpower. It is a natural continuity resulting from the individual's nervous system, emotional responses, and cognitive evaluation methods working at the same point of balance. The state of being in the right place, previously felt only for brief moments, is no longer a temporary peak, but a fundamental state of being. The first tangible manifestation of the bodily frequency is the harmony that emerges in inner sensations. Previously, maintaining a high state of mind or clarity required conscious effort. Now, one exists effortlessly in this state. Life may still be complex, responsibilities may persist, but the mind awakens in the mornings with a quiet clarity. Intensity may increase, but confusion does not. One feels clearly within one's own internal context, without comparison to others or the need for control. The second important sign is the often misunderstood state of profound neutrality. This is not emotional numbness or detachment from life. Rather, one still feels. However, the nervous system no longer produces overreactions. Identity does not swell when praise is received, nor is internal balance disrupted when criticism is offered. Positive experiences create genuine satisfaction, and challenging situations do not descend into fear or despair. In psychology, this is described as a high level of emotional regulation. One no longer reacts from a wounded, outdated self, but from a centered awareness. The third sign is that clarity becomes the default state of consciousness. One no longer constantly seeks answers. The necessary information emerges when needed. This is not a prophecy or an intuitive miracle, but a clearing of unnecessary noise from the perceptual system. Intuitions are no longer signals to be deciphered, but become the normal way of functioning. Decisions don't feel like guesses. They appear natural and clear. This clarity is the result of less distorted perception, not more overthinking. The fourth sign is that action becomes significantly more fluid. The person no longer constantly forces themselves to do the right thing. Action arises naturally, as it is in harmony with the inner state. When a door opens, one enters without hesitation. When a door closes, there is no need to force it. This is consistent with the principle known in complex systems as the path of minimum resistance. Because energy is no longer expended on internal conflicts, movement becomes more precise and effective. The fifth sign is the almost complete elimination of the delay between internal perception and external feedback. When a person feels that a direction is correct, steps taken in that direction become visible in a short time. People's true intentions and the essence of situations are perceived more quickly. This is not a magical manifestation. It is the synchronization of the perception and response cycle. When the frequency becomes sufficiently stable, the system no longer needs to send the same information repeatedly. The sixth sign is the disappearance of the influence of old impulses that once governed the individual. Fear-based habits, compulsive responses, and repetitive psychological cycles dissolve because they are no longer nourished. The individual may still see these impulses, but does not identify with them. Psychologically, this means that trauma-based responses are no longer central. The need for healing diminishes because the individual has risen above the layer of consciousness that produced the wound. The seventh sign is the change in how the body is perceived. The body is no longer perceived as a burden to be carried or a mechanism to be controlled. It is perceived as a more sensitive, lighter, and wiser system. The individual naturally knows when to rest and when to move. With the body and awareness merging into a single regulatory system, the need for external rules and rigid protocols decreases. The eighth sign is the rearrangement of environmental conditions to match this frequency. Opportunities arise without coercion. The right people enter one's life at the right time, and doors open without being knocked on. This is the result of the individual living as they are, not as a version of themselves trying to be. The system organizes itself to support a high capacity for adaptation. The ninth and quietest sign is freedom. This freedom stems not from having unlimited options, but from not being dependent on those options. At this level of consciousness, the individual knows they can remain in harmony no matter which direction they choose. Freedom comes not from breaking down boundaries, but from transcending them. The embodied frequency is not a goal, but a stable mode of operation of consciousness. From this point, life ceases to be a problem, to be intellectually solved. It becomes a flow that can be read directly. The individual no longer forces themselves to improve because they are already living with their true essence. In this case, reality adapts not as a structure imposed from the outside, but as a natural response of the field. After this stage, what matters is not waiting for a new sign or the next step, but the ability to remain stable at this frequency. The quantum realm is not a fleeting peak experience, but a way of functioning. And this functioning is maintained not by rigid discipline, but by the natural behavioral codes of mature awareness. These codes are not technical. They are the very essence of identity.